All right, everyone. I'm going to turn on my camera and I reckon that we're going to get started. So guys, g'day everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm going to figure out how to get my camera up on the other screen so that everyone can see me. Just bear with me for one moment. There we go. Can someone in the chat let me know if you can see me today? I can't see my webcam on the screen for some reason. Got to figure out if I'm doing something wrong. You can? Perfect. Thanks very much for letting me know that, guys. So in terms of today's session, I think we're going to do things a little bit differently because we're all here for the AVETMISS Reporting webinar. And we've got quite a few people who are watching this one live. So I'm thinking there's going to be quite a few questions that are asked throughout the session today. What I think our plan of attack will be is if I'm demonstrating something on the screen or explaining something, and you have a follow-up question you'd like to ask, please, by all means, pop it in the chat. And at the end of the presentation today, we'll have a Q&A and I'll read through those questions and alleviate any doubts that you guys have. So without further ado, guys, thanks for joining me today. This is session, I think it's number 9 now of our aXcelerate refresher training sessions. You can see that to date, we've covered a various number of topics, which can be seen on the screen here. And we're going to be looking at AVETMISS reporting today. Now, this is going to be an interesting session because the knowledge of AVETMISS compliance and the process of obtaining your AVETMISS report is quite nuanced and very business specific. So there's going to be quite a few people in the call today or in the meeting today who are familiar with what the AVETMISS files are and the process. But I'm going to start off with a very basic explanation for those who aren't yet aware, because I do know we have quite a few new employees in the chat with us today. So what we're going to be covering, firstly, is what is AVETMISS reporting. Now, we won't be spending too much time on that. I'll just briefly explain. We're going to have a look at the NAT files, which are the files you obtain from aXcelerate for the purpose of reporting them to the government. And I'm going to be breaking down what's in these files because at a glance, they can be quite confusing. We're going to have a look at AVETMISS reporting in aXcelerate and what's called a pre-validation check, which is when you're exporting your AVETMISS report, aXcelerate runs a quick check to see if there's any glaring errors that can be resolved. And we're going to finish the session today by looking at some AVETMISS errors and the process of resolving them, as well as a way you can actually verify your NCEVA data within your aXcelerate account through the use of the NCEVA integration. So before I move into aXcelerate, let's have a look at this first point with what is AVETMISS reporting. AVETMISS reporting is something that every organization that delivers accredited training must undertake. It's to do with national reporting guidelines. And while each state has their own reporting compliance rules that you must follow, the AVETMISS report is a very broad, national standard of collating and reporting this data. On the screen, you can see it stands for the Australian Vocational Education and Training Management Information Statistical Standard, just to keep it nice and simple. And it's very important that you get this information correct when reporting. And the best way to do that is to understand how to view and manage your data from a systems perspective. So I'm going to quickly jump into the aXcelerate account. And for those who haven't seen it before, I'm going to show you the AVETMISS reporting screen. And then we're going to have a look at some example files that are downloaded using this report. So from our aXcelerate dashboard, we're going to hover over reports. And while you may not have all the options that I do here, you will have the AVETMISS option. So by clicking on that, this screen is where we obtain the NAT files, which again are the files that you report to the government. And we need to select the dates that we're obtaining this for and any other sort of qualifying information along the way. So, for example, I'm going to run a 2020 report. By selecting 2020, you'll see that the dates underneath have changed to be the full year. Oh, sorry, I've glanced over this one. I'll quickly mention that I'm going to start off today by showing you an aXcelerate validation type, but we will be looking at the NCEVA type when we look at that at the conclusion of the session. So again, I want to do an AVETMISS report for my 2020 data set. So I've selected 2020, and of course you can go in here and amend the dates further if required. But by and large, you're going to be running full year reports. And with the collection type, we need to change that to end of year. Now, the difference between end of year and interim is evidently if you're running a report during the year without a full data set, a full year's data set, that would be an interim report. If you're running your full year's data, you want end of year report. And for a breakdown as to what these two options do from a systems perspective, essentially they just prevent any confusion. So for example, if I'm studying on the 31st of December, and I'm still going to be studying on the 1st of January, I can't include in my report that I'm continuing. We have to finalize that result purely for reporting purposes. Now, we don't finalize that in aXcelerate. We finalize that by selecting end of year. And you'll see here that end of year converts all unit competency enrollments with an end date outside of the collection year to a 70 outcome, which again is a mouthful and it probably isn't going to make sense to a lot of people, which look fair enough. All you need to know is if it's an end of year report, select end of year. If you're doing it during the year, select interim. Now, state reporting format, again, there's a lot of compliance differential, a lot of different compliance rules depending on where you're physically based. So evidently in Queensland, I would want to select Queensland. However, when we're running an AVETMISS report, which is a national standard, we actually want to run an NCEVA report. If we needed to run a specific report for maybe New South Wales Smart and Skilled, we can do so using the AVETMISS reporting tool, but that's a lot more niche and probably not what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be leaving NCEVA as the state reporting format. Excuse me, everybody. Now, version 8. This isn't going to be too relevant for a lot of you guys. It's simply to do with the version of the AVETMISS report we're running. From 2020 and onwards, version 8 has been used. If you're running a historical report from 2015, use version 7. If you're doing a current year or previous year report, use version 8. NAT 30A. Now, this is to do, again, with your state reporting. We don't need to tick this for a national NCEVA report. So we're going to move on. Now, classes to include. If, for example, I only wanted to report on Queensland-based classes, select Queensland. If I wanted to report on national, I select national. Pretty self-explanatory. Convert NYA outcomes. NYA is an old identifier used by AVETMISS, so we don't need to worry about this. Again, you can leave it ticked, but it's really not going to make too much of a difference for our current year's data. AVETMISS client identifier. Now, this is a bit more niche. If you're looking at this field and you don't know what it means you need to ignore it. If you see that field and you know what it means, that's when you need to pay attention to it. So we're just going to brush over that for now. Funding source national. Now, this is where we select the type of students that we would like to include in this report. So for example, if a student, excuse me, guys, if a student is a domestic full fee paying student and we want them to appear in this report by selecting 20, we're now including all of our domestic fee paying students. And if you hover over the number, you can actually see what these specific fields relate to. If you're not too sure what to add here, look, I recommend just ticking them all because that way it's going to capture all of your student enrollments. Only completed units of competency, pretty self-explanatory. If you only wanted to report on completed units, you can tick that. I'm going to leave it blank. Active classes only. So if you tick this, any class that has been archived won't be included in your report. I'm going to leave it unticked, but again, just depends on your organization and how you utilize aXcelerate. Report withdrawn with no hours. If we tick this, if a student has studied with us, but then they withdraw from their enrollment and they have 0 nominal hours, they'll still be included in the report. If we untick this, they wouldn't be included. I'm going to leave it ticked. And exclude unverified USIs. Look, I don't want to report on an unverified USI, so I'm going to leave that unticked. Now, these additional filters, if you have domains in your account, you can run these reports for a very specific domain. If you wanted to run it for a specific student, you can. And if you wanted to run it for a specific contract or schedule, you can do that as well. Now, an example of when you would use these additional filters would be if you have an AVETMISS error for a specific student and you're having trouble identifying it, you can run a report just for them and actually skim through the data and see where that report lies. Now, we want to run this report. So I'm going to click Run AVETMISS Report. But before I do that, what this essentially does is it does a pre-validation check. Now, what that means is aXcelerate the system will look at this data and tell you if there's anything that doesn't quite align or doesn't quite make sense. To make more sense of that, let's run this report and have a look at what appears on the screen afterwards. Here we go. So when there's a cross, it means that there's an error that we need to investigate. So for example, let's have a look at our training organization and what this error could be regarding. I'm going to click on the drop-down arrow to the left, and we'll see here it says the mandatory field training organization identifier must not be blank. So I'm sitting here scratching my head going, what does that mean? Look, let's actually click on the hyperlink it gives us, and we want to look out for the training organization identifier. Look at that. It's telling me that I need to enter a training org identifier in order for my AVETMISS reporting to be compliant. Another example is if we look at our delivery locations that we offer, we can see that we've got 2 errors. So let's have a look. We have Warner and Milton as our delivery locations. But again, it's letting us know that the training organization identifier has to be entered. So if we resolved this earlier error and reran the report, these 3 errors, because they're all the same, will disappear. Now, I'll quickly mention, before we have a look at this in more depth, you'll notice these different NAT files that I mentioned very briefly at the start. So when we run an AVETMISS report in aXcelerate, it breaks it down into 13 or 14 different file types. And each file type has its own corresponding section. So for example, I'm going to quickly jump back into the slide here. And let's have a look at what each of these files includes. So the NAT10, and I'm going to pull this up on my other screen here, if it wants to let me. That's all right. I'm going to figure this out later, guys, because my window doesn't want to transfer. Anyway, I'll come back to that. Sorry, guys. In the NAT10 file, we've got our RTO-related details. So again, the NAT10 was telling us we didn't have a training organization identifier. That was an error with our RTO details, and that's going to be captured in the NAT10 file. The NAT20 contains all of our delivery locations. So again, if we had an error with, for example, a postcode we used in a delivery location, it would appear here in this NAT file. The NAT30 houses your qualifications. The 60 houses your units of competency. 80 houses student information. And 85 has their address-related information. I'll let you guys know that a lot of the errors stem from the NAT85 file because it is in line with compliance that every student needs to have a valid postcode and state entered. So you're probably going to see quite a few errors in the NAT 85 just in your time working in the industry. The NAT 90 is all about disability related information. The NAT 100 is any prior learning that a student has undertaken is recorded in here. Now, the NAT 20 is going to be the biggest file in your AVETMISS report. This has all the activity data. And what that essentially means is if I, as a student, am enrolled in 1 unit of competency, that's 1 activity. If I, as a student, am enrolled in 10 units of competency, that's 10 activities. So you see every single activity that every single student within your reporting parameters is enrolled into. So if there's a particular problem with a student's enrollment, it's not going to tell you, oh, hey, there's a problem with this class. It's going to say, there's a problem with this specific student in this specific unit of competency enrollment. So you'll know, and aXcelerate will even link you to that unit of competency, and you can go in and amend the error. And finally, the NAT 130 has any award data, so certificates that you've issued and the corresponding certificate number. So these can be really handy to have because if you're running an NCEVA check and you're actually trying to submit your report and it tells you that there's an error to do with a specific contact or specific location, knowing which NAT file to open up and look into is a very, very powerful tool. And I certainly recommend that you guys screenshot this page and keep it somewhere handy and refer back to it when doing your annual AVETMISS reporting. Now, I'm going to jump back into the aXcelerate account. Now, let's assume that I've gone through and amended all of these errors. Again, this is a demonstration account, so we're going to have a lot of errors in here. And just so we can proceed, I'm going to pretend they're all amended. If we had no errors in the account, we would see this screen. Your AVETMISS NAT files have been successfully compiled, and those files are available to open. What I'm going to do here, because I was having some tech issues, I'm going to try open this on the other screen, and it doesn't want to come across. Sorry, guys, I was going to go into the file and actually show you what these look like. Here we go. I know what I can do. I'm going to share my other screen. Give me 1 second. There we go. This looks a bit better. So that zip file that I downloaded, I've just opened, and we can see all of the NAT files inside. So we know that the NAT 10 has all of our training organization information. So if I open that, we can see that this is our feature demo account. And if we had entered all the other information, such as who we're operating under, our contact number, etc., that all gets contained in this file. Let's have a look at the NAT 120, which is the activity that I was telling you about. So let's go in here. Each of these codes here is a delivery location. So this is a postcode. In here, well, each row is to do with one specific student. So in here, we can see this is basically just like a full string of dates. So for example, you can see that this one ran from the 7th of December, 2017, and I've just moved that somehow accidentally, to the 8th of December, 2017 as well. So scrolling down again, you can see there's a lot of data in this account here. And that's because, just a reminder, each row is one student's enrollment in one specific unit of competency. So for example here, this is the qualification, this row. And here you can see each unit of competency that the student's enrolled into. And these numbers here is that student's ID within aXcelerate. So again, it's just raw data. You're looking at lines and lines of text. When this gets validated, it's not reviewed by a human, obviously, but it's very handy to know what's within these files so that if there's a very specific error that you need to amend, you can jump in and have a read and turn what looks like the matrix into actual legible information. So I'm going to close this and return to my other screen. Thanks for bearing with me, guys. And I can see we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Again, I'll review these at the end of the session today, once we've finished the presentation. So I've shown you briefly how to resolve AVETMISS errors. Again, it's very difficult for me to give specific, actually, look, I'm going to actually rerun this report. And I want to see if I can find a doozy of an error. Here we go. So within our training activity, in this account, I have nearly 2,000 errors. Let's have a look at these and find a random error, and I'm going to go in and try to amend it. Now I say that, but it looks like there's quite a lot of things we need to amend. I'll break down what we're looking at here actually. So this is Wes's enrollment in a TAE certification. So let's open this in another tab. And we know that this error is relating to this enrollment within this class. Again, this is just a class we set up for a demonstration, so it's going to have quite a few compliance errors because we're not actually reporting this data to the government. But for example, let's have a look in here. Mandatory field, funding source national, must not be blank. If we scroll down to Wes's information, we can see funding source national is blank. If we set this as domestic full fee paying student, save this and rerun the report, that error would be amended. You can see here that although this looks like a massive amount of errors, you can see they're really all stemming from the same thing. If we entered our training organization identifier, which was an error from the NAT 10, it's actually going to resolve a bunch of other errors that we have. So if you ever run one of these reports and you see that you've got, 200 errors and you have alarm bells going off in your head, don't panic because it's likely going to be a pretty simple fix. Now, again, what we're looking at the screen here is just a pre-validation check. So aXcelerate will look at that year's data and see if there's any errors that can be easily amended. So for example, it runs the report, it looks at your NAT 10 file and goes, oh, this is actually missing some information. So it says, hey, it should have this additional information. If you run, for example, a delivery location, if you look in your NAT 20 and you've entered an incorrect postcode, it's going to pop up and go, hey, this is an incorrect postcode. What the pre-validation tool doesn't do is compare your new batch of AVETMISS data to your previous year's AVETMISS data. So for example, let's say that we've run this report from aXcelerate. aXcelerate looks and goes, awesome, this data looks pretty clean. But then we upload it to NCEVA's website to actually submit. That's when you might get an error that says, hey, whoa, how come this student was studying last year? You reported that this student was studying, but in this year's report, that student's just simply not there. So that's something that aXcelerate won't pick up on. But obviously, when a government body is comparing one set of data to another set of data, and they're aligning every single dot automatically, if one of those things doesn't connect, it goes, hey, review your information and tell us why this isn't connecting. That's not something aXcelerate does because we don't have access to the exact files that you submitted to NCEVA. Now, what I always strongly recommend is setting up an NCEVA integration, because what you can do is run a pre-validation check and an NCEVA submission from aXcelerate. It is so much simpler than trying to upload this separately to NCEVA, trying to validate it through NCEVA separately, and then trying to submit it. You can do it all through aXcelerate. I'm going to very briefly show you how we set this up, and then I'll show you what it looks like. If we go into System Settings and go into Web and Other Integrations, we're going to scroll down to the NCEVA API integration. Now, in the demonstration account, we do have this connected, but if it's not connected, you will simply say C, status, not connected, and instead of test connection, it's going to tell you to generate a token. When you click that, aXcelerate provides you with a string of text, and you can then copy that into your Enceiver account, which again is separate to aXcelerate, but I'm sure you guys will have one. And what aXcelerate then does is gets permission to submit those reports to Enceiver on your behalf. So now that we have this connected, if I hover over reports, Enceiver validation is going to appear and we can select this. Now, again, this is just a demonstration account. I was hoping I was going to be able to get in here and show you, but what it would show you in reality is a full list of dates, and it would say, for example, January to March 2019, March until July 2019, so on and so forth. So what you can do is say, I want to do my full year's report for 2020. So you would select January, December 2020, click on that, and that's your Enceiver validation done. Any errors that need amending will pop up and be shown, but otherwise, that's how I recommend doing your Enceiver submission. Just doing it all from aXcelerate in the one spot. If you don't have an Enceiver validation, you need to download the NAT files from aXcelerate and separately upload them into your AVETMISS account. Now, guys, this has been a lot of information that I've thrown at you because the world of AVETMISS is very nuanced. It's, again, compliance-based, so there's a lot to know. We could have sat down here for 5 hours today and I could have explained, every little nuance that I'm aware of with AVETMISS reporting. But my best advice to you is having an understanding of how this information is collected, how this information is validated, and how that information can be changed is very important. And if you have a good grasp of that, your AVETMISS reporting is going to be very straightforward year on year. So while we haven't had a look at the full process, I'm very confident that the information obtained in this session will be really, really helpful. We've looked at what each NAT file is and what's contained in each NAT file. I've shown you the process of running an AVETMISS report from aXcelerate and what specific fields mean along the way. We've also discussed and I've demonstrated the Enceiver integration within the system settings, but unfortunately couldn't demonstrate the actual process of submitting to Enceiver. But rest assured, it is a very self-driven, self-explanatory process. And we've also briefly looked at how we can validate or remove some AVETMISS errors through the use of aXcelerate. So guys, our next session on Thursday, the 29th of July is going to be on report building. So I hope to see you guys there. And look, as always, thanks very much for joining me today. I say this every time, but with AVETMISS, it's very particular. Look, sitting down and having someone speak at you for half an hour is actually quite draining, especially when it's on a complex topic like AVETMISS. So I really appreciate your diligence sitting down and wanting to learn more about this, because it's something that, we in this industry just need to be aware of and need to be across because it's so important. So guys, thank you very much. Again, to those watching this live, I can see a few questions have come through in the chat. So I'll end the recording and I'll answer those. But otherwise, guys, thanks very much for joining me, and I'll catch you next time. See you later.